Alrighty, I figured I'd make a video about the K-swap that I did in my CD5 Accord. It's a 1997, had 500,000 miles on it, and the engine was fine. It actually ran good, the old F22, but yeah, I don't know, figured if I want to K-swap something, it might as well be the Accord that I like and everybody else hates. Give you a little tour here. She's a real turd. The stickers are worth more than the car. Yep. There's a big old hole in the bumper, so people know. It has a spoiler. And a lot of dents. The inside's actually alright. Yeah. 500,000 miles on it, general Ultimax tires, tons of hood, dents, chem block. It's not a Civic, but these stickers were free. So I'm going to go over the K-swap that I did. I did a K24A swap. See my hood release here, made out of a Cintas coat hanger. Bear with me here, let me get the prop rod. Here it is. So it had an F22 in it, the old F22A. It's a K24A, a JDM imported engine that I got from someplace in California. I'm in Michigan. I think it was $1,300 shipped, which was a lot cheaper than I thought it'd be. Anyway, take a look around. You can see that it's a pretty haggard swap. I don't know, the stuff that needed to be right is right, and the rest is good enough to drive it, which is all I wanted. The engine is a K24A, which is similar to what we would have in the States as a K24A2 out of a TSX. It is the real VTEC, 3-lobe VTEC. The transmission I used is out of a 2003 Accord. It's a 5-speed trans. I'd like a 6-speed. Those are hard to find and more expensive. I think I got the trans for $150 from a salvage yard up by me. Anyway, I even got a list here of what to go over. Engine, $1,300. That's the stock TSX intake, or an Accord intake. I think they're pretty similar. The throttle body I used is from an 03 Accord. The throttle bodies you can use are any that are throttle cable driven and that have the throttle cable on the inside. I believe the CRVs maybe and the RSX have the throttle cable on this side of the intake or of the throttle body, which makes your throttle position sensor over here and actually makes it read backwards. So you can actually rewire it. You can repin it. This was just easier because it's already set and it's fine. The belt setup and stuff that I have, this is a EP3 tensioner and idler pulley. New alternator, Denso. Don't like dealing with any other junk. Major difference, the JDM K24 water pump housing, which is the big housing that sits down here behind the alternator that holds the water pump. The JDM stuff is actually all different, and how it mounts and stuff. Like the alternator actually bolts from the side, almost like a K24Z engine. So I got a different water pump housing off the junkyard, so that's bolted to the front, and I can use all the US accessories just in case they go bad. There's no AC because there's no real room for it on these. These have the front subframe down there, if you can see that in the video. These have the front subframe that goes along the front here, which connects to the suspension, so it ain't like I can just take it off. With that there, that really gets in the way of an AC compressor. You may be able to squeeze one down there, but it sure didn't seem possible when I was doing it. So I don't have AC, and I also don't have power steering. Power steering I just looped for now back here, if you can see it back there. I literally took the hose off one end and just looped it around to the other. And it's actually not that bad. It's not that heavy. I thought it'd be a lot heavier to turn. It's not that bad. Once you're going like 2-3 miles an hour, I mean, you notice it, but it ain't that horrible. It's livable. Battery is actually from a Honda Fit. Small enough to fit there. The mounts, I did buy Hasport mounts because I didn't really see another option. The Hasport mounts were not cheap. Those were like $650. Mounts were $650, engine was $1,300, trans was $150. The belt that I ended up using, important information here. The only belt I could find, because I don't have AC or power steering, was a AutoZone belt labeled 520K6. It's a 52-inch belt that's 6 ribs. As you can see, I'm missing a rib here, so I just put it on the outside rib of all the pulleys, and I don't know, knock on wood, it seems to be fine. The clutch, I've usually ran ACT clutches on different cars that I've swapped in the past. I was pissed off at how much things were costing, so I bought an eBay clutch kit from Clutch Masters. I think it was $169 for the clutch, flywheel, pressure plate, throttle bearing, everything. I've only put about 100 miles on it since the swap, but I don't know, it feels fine, engages good. Haven't had any issues. I mean, hopefully it lasts more than 101 miles, but I guess we'll see. The intake, you can see, is a mix of the TSX intake, so I can have an intake air temp sensor, and then some more eBay garbage with a little wire mount. When you install the Hasport mounts, they don't really tell you, but you do have to make quite the adjustment in the subframe back here to make room for the transmission. So where that ring gear sits on the transmission, right, it sticks out a little bit. Now normally in this car, the engine would be over here and the trans would be over here. So being that the trans is over here, well, they have that nice recess in there. But now that it's swapped, it's over here. So a 20-pound sledge makes that nice bend in there, which is what you need. They don't really explain that in the instructions, but you do need to, because otherwise the transmission does not fit. This side mount bolts right in, rear mount bolts right in the normal brackets, and then it uses a few bolts on the transmission and on the engine. This side, the passenger side, you do have to cut out. So you cut out the original mount that sits here, and then you weld in this bracket. So this bracket, there is a bolt hole down here that you kind of locate this with. What I did, I had the engine and trans sitting in here. I kind of located it with that back mount. I had that on, and then connected this one, and then just kind of wiggled around the engine until I thought it looked pretty level and it looked straight. And then I torched this in. So that's all welded in. And then it is also a dual height kit. So you can actually move this engine up or down about, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch or so. It's sitting at its lowest setting now because I don't have the car lowered or anything. So I wasn't worried about like the oil pan clearance. But I did want the hood to fit. Also, the hood fits fine if you cut out all the webbing. And that was just done with a cutoff wheel 2 days ago, so I could actually have a hood and not drive around like a crazy person. Cooling, I managed to fit a EP3 radiator in. Well, no, it's actually from an RSX. I believe an EP3 would fit also. So this is actually from, I think it's an 05 RSX. And it fits. I had to do some pretty major adjustments. I had to cut out around the headlights here. I pretty much cut out the lower radiator support. Welded a bar in the bottom. And then welded on little tabs for the feet for the radiator. But it does fit, and I wanted a full width radiator. Because it's a K series, they do make a bunch of heat. I know you can buy swap radiators and stuff like that. None of that stuff is cheap. So this is a RSX radiator with RSX fans. Those both actually fit in here plenty fine. Wiring's all the same. That just plugs into actually the existing chassis harness, which I used. Hoses are kind of a mix and match. I believe this is part of the lower hose for a 2008 Accord lower hose that I used for the upper and just cut it to fit, just because the bends happen to be right. And then the lower hose, I believe, is actually the upper RSX hose that's just also cut to fit. I also needed a swivel neck thermostat housing. Any other housing didn't seem to have the right angle, and this was $40 on eBay, and I can put a temp sensor in there. Still yet to be wired up, but that is there, and an option in the future. Don't mind this red wire, that's actually a ground wire, just I didn't have a black one laying around, so it's red. It's a ground wire. Clutch cable you can actually see here, the clutch line. The clutch line is from K24, I believe. It's like $50, and that literally threads into my slave cylinder there, and then just runs up here right to my original master. If you can see it down in there, there's actually a nice little U that the kit comes with. So, yeah, that threads right in. That was probably the easiest thing that I did. To bleed that, if you guys haven't bled clutches before, if you bleed it from the bottom up, it's actually far easier because air likes to rise in a system, and since this is the highest point of the system, it's far easier to do it backwards. So what I do, I bought it's actually a syringe for food, but I put some fuel line on there, like little yellow fuel line for like a weed whacker, and put that on the bleeder. Broke that bleeder open, had the syringe full of brake fluid, and then actually pushed it this way and pushed it all the way up into there and just pushed a ton of fluid through. And I maybe did the syringe 3 or 4 times and the whole system was bled, and it feels fine now. That's far easier than having you and a buddy go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Throttle cable. Throttle cable is also from K24. It was like $50. It's actually for an EG Civic K-swap, but the mounts and everything are the same. It just clips into the firewall there all nice. And then down here, the only thing I did notice is this cable's a lot longer than what I needed. So I did extend this bracket. This is actually the stock throttle bracket for a 03 Accord. And this part here used to be here, and I added this 2-inch piece of angle iron in here and just welded this in. Just a 2-inch piece that brought this out far enough to where I can actually run my throttle cable, with still some room to adjust if need be. Fuel system. Fuel system is another eBay special, Jack Spanier Racing or whatever garbage eBay sells. It was like $110 and it was the whole kit. It was the AN lines, the fittings, the regulator, and everything, and they actually had an adapter to just thread on to the existing fuel filter. So the fuel filter there, I just had an adapter with a new crush washer, one of the copper crush washers, and threaded that on. That's my feed, so that runs in here. So this, I think it's at 55 PSI. And then my return, that was a little frustrating. The return runs down here. And then I had to make some type of adapter fitting. You can buy an actual adapter. I just went to the hardware store. This is a bunch of brass fittings to go from an AN line just to a normal hose. I think it's a 1/4-inch hose. And then that just runs to my existing return, which was already there. So the 97 Accord has a return system, whereas a K motor usually does not. Usually that's built into the fuel tank on cars with K engines. So you need a regulator with a return built in like that, so you can have the feed, return, and then your outputs right here. And then this is actually an adapter. It's a 6AN to 5/16 quick connect. So I could actually just use the existing fuel rail and didn't have to mess with that at all. Stock fuel injectors, everything like that, super normal. Map sensor. Don't mind the janky map sensor hold down. You could run a normal map sensor. Originally, I was trying to use the stock Accord radiator, which had the outlet right here, so I was trying to make room for it. Anyway, we went to an RSX radiator, so this don't have to be janky. Coolant reservoir bottle. I just made out of, I had this laying around. I don't know if it was supposed to be for a tank or whatever. It was a solid cap, but I vented it because a reservoir has to be vented for your coolant expansion to either push in or suck out. You can't push coolant in there if it's sealed. There'd be nowhere for the air to go. Wiring. Wiring was a very complicated part of the swap. That was the hardest part. I mean, it took like a day to put the engine in and the mounts. The wiring took forever. So I bought a eBay harness. You can knock it all you want. It's not rye wire. It's not Hasport. It's not hybrid racing. Whatever. It's an eBay harness that was $70. And knock on wood, it seems to be doing fine. It seems okay. The connectors feel fine. The wire colors are nowhere close to what Honda would use. So if you're trying to use diagrams and stuff to diagnose things, that will not be accurate at all. But for $70, I don't really have any huge complaints. Yeah, it's like a normal K20 K-swap wiring harness. The only thing I had to change, and this is something that if you look on any forum, a bunch of guys have complained about the eBay harnesses. I don't remember the pin numbers offhand. I want to say 8 and 14 on the E connector, but that doesn't sound right. Anyway, there's 2 white wires that are switched around, and it is the fan control wire and the ignition coil power wire. They're both white. They're on the same connector. I just forget what pins. Anyway, those are switched around. So I wired this all up and everything, had the fuel set up and went to start it, and it wouldn't start. But after I would try to start it, so it cranked, say I cranked it for like 10-15 seconds and let go, my fans would spin for like a half second. And that made me wonder what's happening. So I actually took the harness off, checked the wiring of every pin back to the PCM connector per the Honda manual to make sure everything was right. And those 2 were actually switched around. I switched them around, put the harness back on, and everything fired up and it ran fine. Being this is a K24, a few things had to be rewired. So any swap harness you buy is going to be set up for like a K20. Usually it's based on like an RSX Type S. So the knock sensor is different. So the knock sensor, you can either splice in a K24 knock sensor pigtail or just repin the connector to a K24 knock sensor, or you can put a K20 knock sensor in. The crank sensor had to be rewired. You can't really see it, whatever, that's down there. The crank sensor wiring is different. You can buy a K20 crank sensor and it will fit in a K24, or you can do what I did and I just repinned the connector because I don't want to buy another sensor. Essentially what you do is you will take the 3-pin wiring, the connector. Let's say you're looking at the connector with the wires coming towards you, so the back of the connector with female terminals, and you're going to move every wire one spot to the right. So you're going to move the left one to the middle one to the right, and then the right one will go all the way back to now the left. So you move everything one to the right with the wires facing towards you with the connector facing away. If you do that, then a K24 crank sensor will work fine. You just gotta make sure to repin it, otherwise it won't run. Also, the TDC sensor and cam sensor were not labeled on my harness, and I can't tell you which is which, but it didn't run before, and then I swapped these two around, and then it ran. So whichever one it is, that's the TDC, and that's the cam. So, anyway. But yeah, the wiring loom's fine. It's like a mesh covering, which isn't the worst. It's not waterproof, which I ran it into where the AC used to be, and I gotta figure out how to seal that somehow, because being that this is all mesh stuff, even if I seal around it, water could still get in here and wick its way inside, which is gonna go to the PCM, and that's bad. So I may just run the wire loom a bit lower and then up and in hopes that if there is water in it, it'll sit at the bottom and drip out, and it won't just pool inside the PCM. The PCM I used is a PNF PCM out of an EP3 Civic. I bought it used on Marketplace with Honda V2 installed. It's like $700, so that wasn't cheap. Honda, I think, is hands down the best way to go. If you can get V3 or V4, great. You get a few more options. You get Bluetooth on V4. Bluetooth didn't matter to me. I wanted my gauges to work anyway, so I didn't see a huge point in Bluetooth. But anyway, you need some type of tunable PCM so you can run these, and you can turn some stuff off. The shift cables. Shift cables are from an 03 Accord. The shift box is also from an 03 Accord. I'm not the proudest of how that's mounted, but it is mounted and it ain't going anywhere. When I took out the old shift box and put in the new one, the location I wanted it, I could line up two of the bolt holes. Just the two, but not the other two. Stupid door locks. My door switch is broken, so it doesn't know if it's locked or unlocked, so it just cycles and cycles and cycles. Anyway, back to the shifter. I got 2 bolts to go down, and the other 2 are just huge 1/4 inch, 3-inch long self-tappers with a washer on that's just ran down straight into the tunnel. It ain't going nowhere, but the cables do work. They are a, I don't know, fine length. If anything, they're a little long. They're kind of bunched up here just a little bit. But yeah. Back to the wiring here. Grounds are important. I have a ground here that actually goes right on the bolt here that the harness grounds to, just to make sure it's a good ground that goes to the chassis. Got a ground here for the battery. I have that red ground over there. Yeah, grounds are important. They're pretty finicky if you don't have them. Starter. The starter that's on it was on the engine. It's an automatic starter. Some people on forums say you need a manual starter. It's the same part number for Honda. This is an automatic starter. It's a manual trans, and it starts perfectly fine, and the teeth aren't grinding or anything. So any starter will work. I made my own starter harness, kind of charge harness, whatever you want to call it. I took a charge harness off of a 2005 Accord, which whatever, same thing, like 2003 to 07. I took that off, stripped all the tape and crap that Honda has on it, and kind of broke it down to what I need. And it runs from the alternator here to the starter, and on the starter signal, so 3 wires all wrapped up, run up here. I got it to my positive cable, and then it runs up here to my 2 terminals in here. so I could run all the stock chassis lights and everything without getting too crazy. This black one is for the alternator. That's the ELD originally for the electronic load detector, which we don't use in a K-swap, but that does run over here. And that's the starter wire with the big 100 amp or 80 amp fuse there. And then I did also use the existing starter signal. The K-swap harness has a starter signal wire on it with the terminal that's zip tied up laying down there. It was on like 16 gauge wire, so I didn't really trust that at all. Or even 18 gauge, it was super tiny. So I actually just used the existing chassis wiring, and I found that to be easier. Then everything's already ran. I already got my starter relays. It's already set up, so I got to push the clutch in for it to start. Everything was just easier. So this plug actually right here, I forget what it's called in the wiring diagram, but this would be your starter signal normally. I got a plug from a junkyard and then ran that into here and just goes right to the starter signal. So that was far easier in my opinion. Also for some of the chassis wiring, I just bought plugs from the junkyard. If you buy like a rye wire kit, it'll have you pull the plugs to the inside of the car. But water intrusion, stuff like that. So I bought all these plugs from a junkyard. I went to a junkyard, there was a few of these old CD Accords in the junkyard and just lopped off these connectors. So then I could just connect my new wires that I was running to the existing like chassis side of the harness. And then I could just find whatever few wires I needed and just, I ran my own loom back here. So I think on this side was the RPM signal, oil pressure light, low oil pressure light, and DLC, not DLC, the check engine light to make the light come on the dash. So I found those three. I ran them to the connector and then the loom and just wrapped it here and then ran it along the existing wire harness and just ran it in there. Those holes right here is where the AC used to be. And I took the AC out and cut a little hole in the bottom of the air box underneath the glove box. And that's where this harness actually runs in. And then I run the wiring and everything actually goes to the PCM, which is in the stock spot underneath this box under here. The only thing that kind of hangs out that I haven't figured out how to mount yet is I got these relays from my hybrid racing conversion harness, and then there's my DLC connector. You can kind of see how the wires run there. So the wires run from up here from the airbox, which is kind of butchered and cracked, down here. I cut a bigger hole in like the PCM case that sits above this, so I could run all those wires in, but that is mounted down there. The hybrid racing conversion harness that I used is fine. It's a cheap way to do a conversion harness. Rywire, I think, will actually make a conversion harness for this car, but it was like $500, and the hybrid racing one was $200, and I'm not bad with wiring, so I actually just did that. See if I can find it here. These are my wiring diagrams that I made for each wire for the conversion harness. See if I can find the K-swap thing here a minute. I'm failing you guys. Here it is. They tell you what wires you got to connect to their conversion harness, and I can just kind of run through here what I used. RPM output, that's going to be the driver's side shock tower. That's part of my wire loom that I made. The mill output, mill function indicator lamp, that's also a wire from that side, from the driver's side. The VSS output, vehicle speed sensor, a K-swapped harness and a K20, usually like a K20 trans, like an RSX or an EP3. I think an Element also, no, a CRV. Also have a vehicle speed sensor, which would be on the back, like right above the, like where the diff is. And Accord actually uses a counter shaft speed sensor, which is on the front. And I haven't wired that, haven't figured out how I want to do that. If I want to rewire it, Honda can actually convert that in the PCM if you have a countershaft speed sensor. So it isn't bad to wire in. Haven't done it yet. Fan control. The hybrid racing conversion harness has relays for this stuff. Fan control, I used all the chassis wiring. So I looked at the PCM, like the original car's PCM, and found what connector it used and what wire the PCM grounded to turn the fans on. And I just used that. So I still have the fan control unit and stuff, which sits under the glove box. And instead of the original F22 PCM, I have the Honda PCM grounding that circuit, and that's how I turn my fans on. So then I could use all the existing wiring. I have the fan relays and fuses and everything in here, so everything's still set. It's all fused, it's all grounded like it should be. The start relay, again, like I said, I use the existing car's wiring, which is way simpler, because then I have the starter cut relays, I have the fuses, I have everything already set up. Oil pressure warning light. That's actually over here on the passenger shock tower. Again, I used OEM connectors and took it out of there and then ran it inside. Same thing. Just found that to be easier. Then they have 3 relays on the hybrid racing conversion harness. One is for the fuel pump. Now they have a relay set up to where the you would put constant power to a relay, and then the relay would turn on your fuel pump. Like, it would send power to the fuel pump, and then your fuel pump would be grounded. On the chassis, like on the normal, how normal Hondas work, the PCM grounds your fuel pump relay, and that's what turns your fuel pump on. So I didn't use the hybrid racing fuel pump relay. I just found the wire, I think it's a yellow wire that comes out of the PCM that actually does the grounding for the fuel pump. And I just had that ground the existing chassis harness relay. So then it's still all OEM. I still have my my main relay and stuff, like old Hondas that always go bad. All that was original. So I just found that to be way easier than running a whole new power wire and finding that connector and everything. So again, options. The conversion harness, the universal one, is more meant for like you're building a strict race car and you don't have any lights. You got like 3 switches and that's it. So that's how I did it. One wire is your main relay, and that runs to your constant 12 volts. I found the main relay on the car's chassis that feeds power from the main relay to the PCM originally, and I just used that straight to the PCM because it's fused and everything with the 10 amp fuse under here. So then I don't have to run a new fuse. I don't have to worry about another relay going bad. I'd figured I'd keep it as stock, if that makes sense, as I could. Switched 12 volts. So when the key's on, you have 12 volts for like the ignition and stuff. That I did the same thing. I just found that to be a lot easier. Let's see, the exhaust. That's a K-tuned header. K-tuned swap header. It fits fine. I had to make some adjustments with a hammer to the subframe and just knock it up a little bit where like the pinch welds are, just to make a little bit more room for it, but it does fit. The exhaust I ran 2.5 inch exhaust all the way back, bent it. I just got pipe from Muffler Man. They'll just sell you a length of pipe, and then bent it, welded it all up, and put a, I think it's a Thrush, I don't know, Thrush something, big muffler on it. Not bad sounding, not horrible. Oh, if you're wondering about the straps, I went on the first test drive of it actually running, super excited, smashing through the gears, and both my fuel tank straps broke. But conveniently, the tank was rusted to the body, so it didn't fall out. But I have ratchet straps for now, because all the bolts broke off in the body. And that's a lot of work to drop the tank and drill out the bolts. So ratchet straps for now. I don't have power steering. I looped that. I think I said that already. I'm probably just repeating myself. Axles. Axles, I used 2005 Acura TSX axles and a K24 half shaft. I think the axles work okay. They're straight from AutoZone. They were like $160 for the pair. Yeah. Hasport sells swap axles. They're like $500. And you would use a K20 half shaft. But from measuring different lengths, I went to the junkyard and pulled 20 or 25 different axles from a bunch of different Hondas and measured them all, and the TSX ones were closest to what I needed, more or less. So 2005 Acura TSX axles with a K24 half shaft. They vibrate a little bit when you're taking off at lower speeds, but if you're going 25, 30 and floor it or take a corner, they seem fine. They don't rub, they don't make any noise, they seem to be all right. From talking to a handful of people on how to measure axles, you have your car at your what's going to be normal ride height. So jack the car up by the control arms, take the wheels off, whatever, and you should be able to, so you take your axle nut off and you push the axle in as far as it'll go, because that inner joint is what gives you your like length adjustment, if that makes sense. As your suspension goes up and down, your axle shaft length has to change, because when it's down, it's got to be longer, and when it's close to straight, it's going to be at its shortest length. So you jack the car up by the control arms, so it's sitting at ride height. Take your wheels off, take the axle nut off, and push the axle all the way in. And we're looking for like a 1/4 inch or so in front of the face of where the axle nut sits, or a 1/4 inch behind. So about that 1/2 inch variance is what you're looking for. The TSX axles seem to be fine. Tighten them down. I've been driving it, like I said, for 100 miles or so. Don't see any major issues. Yeah. And the Accord conveniently has 36 mil hubs. So you can just use the TSX axles. You don't have to swap hubs, no nothing. You don't got to deal with the stupid captured rotors and their stupid design. So that actually just bolts right up. Super convenient. Besides that, whole lot of little odds and ends. I downloaded just a stock K24 base map to get me going. A buddy of mine who does tuning, he's going to help me out, kind of get her dialed in a little bit. But yeah, it's a whole lot faster than an F22, and VTEC kicks in, which is super fun. And yeah, I don't know, no power steering ain't that bad, and no AC ain't that bad, because not many people, at least in my area, have a K-swapped anything, let alone a K-swapped horrible looking CD Accord that most people hate on. So if you have any other questions, put them in the comments, see if I can help out. But I think I covered most stuff. Random hoses, random heater hoses. I think those are actually off of a Mazda CX-9. You could probably just buy, 4 foot of heater hose and just put it on and it'd work fine. Brake booster hose. You need vacuum to have power brakes. That's ran. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, everything kind of worked out. It's still pretty haggard looking, which makes me happy. I don't have a temp gauge for now, so I just have a scan tool hooked up. But yeah, thanks for watching.